Abdallah Al Mouallimi is Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the United Nations. He joins us to discuss the key points of the G20 Summit. First, Mr. Ambassador, congratulations on what your King Salman has called a successful G20 Summit in this rather odd climate. I want to start with climate change. You heard Donald Trump's words there. Given the pledge that Joe Biden has made directly countering Trump, how were the current American president's words received by the other 19 members?
Well, thank you very much for hosting me. I think there is widespread consensus around the need to protect the world from the ill effects of climate change. Whether that is done through the Paris Accords, which we all support, including the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, or whether it is done in alternative channels, is something that can be open for discussion. And the American president, of course, is entitled to express his views as to how best to achieve that objective. But as far as we are concerned, we are committed to the Paris Climate Accord. We think that it provides the best opportunity to lead the world into the direction of controlling emissions and maintaining the heating to within 1.5 degrees, if at all possible.
This G20 happening in the middle of a global pandemic, the G20 making a commitment to getting a vaccine out to the world's most neediest populations, with little details in the communique about how and how much. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, called for $28 billion for mass manufacturing, procurement, and delivery of vaccines. $4 billion of it, he said, is needed immediately. Why a lack of details from the G20 about how and how much it will do so?
Well, because we have just now, in the past few weeks, received the announcements about the availability of the vaccine, and there are more announcements expected in the next few weeks. Now, the presence of these announcements will ultimately lead to a conclusion as to what is the anticipated cost associated with it and who exactly needs to be supported in that regard. So I think that time was short between those announcements and the time of the G Summit. The time was too short to specify a number. But I think the principle is what is more important, and I think the principle everybody has committed to, which is that this has to be a global commodity, that it has to be made available to every citizen of the world, and that cost should not be a hindrance in the way of making sure that it reaches the widest coverage possible.
The UK, the US, France, and Germany all signed their own direct deals with major pharmaceutical companies for vaccines, essentially suggesting that much of the supply for 2021 has already been reserved by those countries. How much of a concern was that for the G20?
I think the G20, including these countries, have reiterated their commitment to make the vaccine available to the entire world. And I think there are many sources of production that you have not mentioned, including India and China and other places that will be tapped to produce the vaccine under one arrangement or another. So I'm not concerned that the vaccine is going to be produced only by these countries and hence will be limited in terms of its use to these countries. I think that the vaccine will be made available, will be manufactured in many parts of the world, and that will make it available and accessible to the population.
There was a commitment for debt deferral into mid-2021. The UN Secretary General wants until the end of the year, but debt deferral to some of the most low-income countries in the world. Why not extend it until the end of the year? And also, how do you get the private sector to cooperate? The G20 urged them to do so. They hold a large chunk of that debt. How do you make them do so?
You make them do so by first setting the example with the government debt. And I think that there is widespread consensus that there will be an extension of the alleviation of the debt burden and the debt service costs through 2021. And I think that once the governments establish those principles, I think the private sector, which is usually or mostly institutionalized, is going to follow suit with respect to the less developed countries. So I think that we will see the necessary progress in the next few weeks and months.
There were calls for reforms of major multilateral organizations like the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, Turkey expressing calls for reforms of WTO. We're expecting their own news conference in the coming hours there. How did the G20 respond to those suggestions?
Well, the G20 has called for reform in the emergency summit that was taking place in March of this year, and in other occasions and in previous opportunities. Saudi Arabia itself has called for reform of the WTO and has presented a blueprint for that. And WHO itself has also acknowledged the need for reform within its own ranks, and so has the United Nations. So I think the call for reform is a universal, widespread call, and is becoming more essential with the kind of challenges that the world is facing, such as the pandemic.
Abdallah Al Mouallimi, Saudi ambassador to the UN, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.